Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see what if Issei meets with the Kendo girls. Part 6. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. There were no words that could properly describe how wrong things had turned. The information given to Sona had only been the bare minimum, and that lack of intel was costing her. Once her peerage had gathered in the student council office, a brief meeting was held over what they knew. The bishop that had disappeared over a year ago after killing 2 peerage members and a bystander in the underworld. According to the given report, the bishop had gotten strong enough to cause the evil peace to mutate. Once that happened, the flood of power caused an argument to get out of hand. It had all been downhill from there. With her entire peerage assembled and ready, the group should have been able to take on a B-class stray. Since the servant was a bishop, Sona had anticipated it to be a magic user, and the sacred gear of her queen would be a critical countermeasure. Issei was likely to be more than powerful enough to handle most of the fight, but he was inexperienced in live combat. Only Tsubaki, Tomo and herself had gone on more than 2 stray hunts. Momo and Reya were competent in their chosen fields, but they still needed her to make the quick decisions. Her plan would have worked had things not taken a strange turn. "Reya's? Where the beep are you?" Sona yelled into the circle next to her ear, her mask of indifference shattered. Her peerage, her family, was divided and wounded. She hadn't seen Yura, Tomo or Ice since the roof collapse of an old and abandoned house on the edge of a forest. They were the group least equipped to handle even one adept magic user, let alone whatever this thing was. "My family's magic seems to be the only thing working on them. Akeno, Kiba and Kaneko are keeping them at bay, but until I can kill enough of them, we can't move." Sona could hear how annoyed and tired Reya was getting through all of this. Her friend may be talented with the power of destruction, but as was the case with most high-class devils, Reya hadn't spent much time training. Her stamina was being worn away by the sheer amount of clones of this nuisance. That wasn't good. Sona was hoping that Reya had been able to finish off their group and meet up to find her missing members. The Citri heiress glared at her opponents. She hadn't known that Reya had been tasked with the same stray, otherwise she would have suggested they search together. If the elders thought it best to send both groups, Sona felt cooperation would have been the best option. Instead of being surrounded by what seemed to be a hive mind type of creature. The stray appeared androgynous, standing a couple inches shorter than herself. All 8 identical copies swayed in perfect sync, with a strange smile that made the stray look utterly exhausted. The arms of the creature were stretched, reaching down to its knees, and where there had once been fingers, long and thin talons of an inky black replaced them. Tsubaki deployed her mirror Alice as one of them whipped its hand out, sending the talons off the hand and towards them. As soon as the mirror had been struck, another attacked in Reya's direction, her bishop deploying a magical barrier to deflect. The reflected attack by Tsubaki took one down, only for the copy to its left to split, leaving them once again up to 8 opponents. Reya returned fire with a compressed bullet of demonic power. It was then that Sona noticed something in the eyes of the one directly in front of her. They lightened, losing that dead look as it attacked her. The others just kept swinging like they had before. The same thing happened when Momo was attacked. None of the others moved out of sync without that look in their eyes. Sona thought she knew why that was happening now. The thought of them appearing to share one consciousness had just been a way to describe how they moved together. But even with that detail spotted, she wasn't sure it made the situation any less dire. "Reya's, I think I know how to kill them." The chance that her theory was correct only went up when the attacks came full circle once more. "We have to kill the original. These copies seem to be acting like drones, responding to orders sent to them." Momo nearly collapsed, able to keep herself protected while on one knee. Tsubaki was breathing so deeply that she had to be feeling the same way and was only standing from sheer willpower. Reya got struck in the shoulder and thigh. "I've killed each one of these things a dozen times over. If that's the case, it isn't here with me." Reya yelled, and the connection between them was filled with static before it calmed. "It has to be with you." Reya finished, blowing a sigh from the toll this elongated fight was taking on them. Sona paled, realizing that her group had also killed the clones at least 5 times each. That only left 2 options. Either the original wasn't in the area at all and was directing them from a safe position, or it was with Issei. She wasn't sure which one of those was better. He was alive at least. Moderately hurt and starting to wear down, she could tell, but he was alive. "If you don't calm down, there's no chance of you being able to help your friends." Elsha scolded him gently, knowing that he didn't need to be yelled at right now. The creature had been giving Issei trouble from the start. When he tried to attack it initially, it dodged and then would either split or attack back before trying to run off. Issei and Tomo had been able to stop the thing from getting away, but hadn't been able to do much else. When they lost sight of it for a few seconds, they came around a corner to find it had cloned itself. "I know that Elsha, I do." but this bastard almost killed them. Tomo's out cold and Yura doesn't look like she can hold out much longer either. Elsha and Drake had both agreed on what he needed to do almost immediately after they saw the clones. They had both seen something similar in their lives. The problem was Issei. He was upset at being unable to stop his fellow peerage members from getting injured, even though he knew what to do. Still the one that kept running. His only chance to do so had been lost when Issei hesitated to make the shot. If he'd done that and killed the stray, Issei would have metaphorical blood on his hands. But after seeing what the creature had done to the old woman as they ran, he was okay with that. He wished that she hadn't been outside, for whatever reason. But he couldn't change what happened. The stray had slit her throat as it ran by, hoping to distract the three young devils enough to get away. Why was a woman that old outside at almost 3 in the morning? Now they had the 4 identical beings nearly cornered, or at least, he and Yura did. Tomo had taken a hit to the head and was unconscious at the edge of his vision. Yura and Issei tried to pinpoint the one they needed to strike, but it was difficult with how they were running around each other. Issei had tried using his flames, but he couldn't cover enough space to hit more than 2 at a time, and never the one he needed. His dragon shot was too linear and would just be dodged. The rook beside him wasn't a magic user, nor did she really have any sort of ranged attacks. Trying to get in close and attack physically had only gotten her scraped and tired. They're tiring too quickly to drag this out much further. I have an idea, one last chance. Boost. Transfer. Issei touched Yura, giving her what little he could. It didn't help with stamina, but the added power would help her stay in the fight and actually be able to damage their enemy. Her posture straightened, almost appearing revitalized, but her breaths were still coming in deep pants. Her blue hair stuck to the sweat on her forehead and neck, fists raised and clenched, ready to get back to the fight. Let's hear it then. We need to get Tomo looked at, and I don't think either of us can last much longer. One of the clones dashed at Issei, talon raised with the inky black nails shining under the moonlight. Raising his arms in a cross to block, with the boosted gear on the outside, Issei felt and heard the sound of his sacred gear once again saving him from a cut that would have only debilitated him further. Issei took a quick and small breath, exhaling it with force, trying to get his flames to catch the retreating attacker. Yura was listening, as Issei seemingly talked to himself, even though she knew that he was talking to the ones in his gauntlet. This was not the time to be having these thoughts, but the Citri Rook was liking what she saw and heard from Issei tonight. He was scratched and bloodied, some from himself, and some from when his dragon shots had torn the clones to pieces and the red liquid spraying out. His anger over trying to protect them, plus the way he fought and looked at, would have had her a little weak in the knees if their life wasn't currently at risk. The sense of desire she dealt with since becoming a devil had twisted her sense of morality in a few areas. Even though she knew that there was a handful of girls already interested and pursuing him, if he kept acting like this, Yura was going to want a taste too. Summon me in a visible form, you're too occupied for me to do it myself. It will use a good portion of what energy you have left, but I can distract the creature long enough for the both of you to finish it. Issei paused, suddenly feeling stupid for not having thought about that earlier. He had been keeping the projection to himself so far, which probably wasn't going to make his king happy once she found out. But it was just his little secret, the thing he could turn to, that no one could take away or ruin. Drake could be a bit grumpy at times, but Elsha had always been on his side. He felt even worse, thinking that Tomo getting hurt could have been avoided if he hadn't been so selfish. You weren't the one attacking her, Ice. Let me help you. After this, you will only have a minute or 2 left, maximum. Drake added out loud, getting Yura to glance over to him. Issei nodded, blocking a glancing blow from one of the talons. Yura, on my mark, we rush and finish this thing. You in? The look on his face, the hardened glare in his eyes, it spoke volumes. He didn't really like the idea of killing, but when killing was to protect the people around him, he would do it. That was a part of the reason he joined Sona in the first place. To protect his loved ones, with all he had to give. I was starting to wonder when those strategy lessons were going to come into play. Okay Ice, I'm with you. Turning forward, Yura cracked her knuckles, ready to finally be done with this stray. Taking a deep breath, Issei focused. With his heart pounding so loud it made his eardrum shake and the boosted gear's drain starting to be felt, it was hard. He had to picture her, Issei had to bring the image of Elsha into reality for others to see. The long silky blonde hair that had tickled his cheeks when his head was on her lap. Mix-matched eyes, her true one the color of a bright and clear sky, the other an emerald green, that told of the hardships in her life and what it had cost her. The shimmer of gold particles started to gather in front of him, like dust being gathered by a breeze. There were plenty of beautiful women in his life now, but Elsha was something else entirely. Her voice. Her cheeks. Shoulders leading to her arms and chest, the way they moved, the way they felt. then to her hips and legs, those long slender legs that were elegant and powerful to a degree that he thought he'd never achieve himself. Yura watched, in a trance from the show, watching as Issei displayed an ability no one knew about. The gold particles spun, condensing until they faded away and left a woman appearing before her very eyes. When it stopped, she saw an unknown woman, beautiful in a way that was hard to even fathom. She opened her eyes, twisting her head to smirk at Issei. "I didn't know you thought so highly of me, I'm flattered." A small blush came over his cheeks before he shook his head and got back on track. "Are you ready, Elsha?" Yura widened her blue eyes, hearing the name. How in all the levels of hell had he managed to summon the Norse fire dragon out of his sacred gear? "Of course, dear. Let's begin, shall we?" Elsha spoke calmly, eyeing both her and Issei. Issei nodded decisively, while Yura's was shaky, still curious and confused. The strongest female user of the boosted gear eyed the opponents before her, looking at them to determine which was the real one. Following each one carefully with her eyes, Elsha watched for any sign of deviation, something only the original would have. It came in the form of a twitch, a hand that moved in a way that the others didn't. Her stance shifted for just a second, enough time for Issei to prepare, before she suddenly wasn't standing before them anymore. She appeared in front of the demon on the far right side, her body sideways and leg pulling over to deliver what would be a devastating kick. "Now ice!" she yelled out, just as her leg was about to connect, the stray trying to guard itself. Dragon Issei pulled his left hand back, a red glow emanating and bouncing off the walls around them. Elsha's leg continued on, shifting through the stray without any resistance. Shot. Issei punched the little red ball of energy, sending it right towards the middle pair of enemies. Like it had before, that seemingly insignificant sphere expanded once his gauntlet-covered fist sent it flying. It barreled forward like a bullet train in both size and speed. Just before they vanished from sight, Yura saw that Elsha disappeared into a puff of golden particles just as she appeared. The wall of energy struck and by the sound of it had ripped through outside wall of the warehouse they were backing the stray towards. Dirt kicked up from the ground, making a small cloud that made it hard to see through. "Yura, let's go. You go left, I'll take right." Issei hadn't lost sight of what they were doing, like she had. She nodded and took off in the direction given to her. The stride she took partially made up for her lack of speed. Yura understood the importance of speed, but her interests had turned how more towards being a heavy hitter. Issei may be a pawn, and given no extra increase in any particular area, besides those that came with being a devil, but he still reached the settling dust cloud before her. "Ah!" she heard Issei call out, both in surprise and pain, before a thud was heard. Yura heard something that sounded like a very large snake hissing, before another red glow shined through that dust as she came up to it. Bursting through, Yura almost couldn't stop in time, before she would have been caught up in the next attack. Issei was on the ground, the stray above him with a talon pointed down to his right eye. The Red Dragon Emperor had been lucky enough to have his legs positioned to keep the stray from killing him right away, and his right hand holding the talon back. The other side of the stray had been obliterated from existence, the wounds cauterized instantly. From the halfway point of the collarbone down, seared flesh, pulsing red and steaming, was exposed for all to see. The stray's other arm was gone from the blast. Issei didn't have the room to initiate another dragon shot the same way he just had. A much smaller sphere gathered in his metal-plated hand, half the size of a tennis ball. His palm pushed it upward. Issei was struggling with the talon as he pushed the orb quickly into the face of the last stray. Yura was left dumbfounded as a smaller cloud kicked up from the ground from the detonation. The sound of meat slapping against the ground followed quickly. She had never seen this level of gore before, her other stray hunts all being clean kills. There was nothing above the base of the neck on the stray, save for some strands of nerves dangling about. It had all been blasted away in the pawn's attempts to save himself and end this crazy hunt. The talon and the rest of the body went limp, falling to the side and off of Issei's legs. He panted with wide eyes, digesting the information of his close call, his body sprawling out on the ground. The blood and meat of the stray kept raining down, most hitting the ground, but a good spray had covered his face. The blue circle came to life, spinning clockwise around her ear. "Yura, status report." Sona sounded as tired as herself and Issei. Her eyes never left his body. "We killed it, the original one. Tomo is unconscious, Issei and myself are a little scraped and exhausted, but otherwise we're all okay." "Where are you?" Yura heard the dual sigh of relief that had to come from the bishops. "Outside the warehouse on the west side of town." "And Kaichu?" Yura paused, looking for the right words to use. "Something wrong?" Yura smiled as some of the king's mask came off through her tone. "Since when can Ice bring Elsha into the real world?" Issei groaned and turned his head towards his blue-haired companion. Yura understood before Sona answered, the king was silent as she let that question register completely. "Say that again." Issei hadn't told anyone about that yet. Oops. Two pairs of eyes, one brown and the other pink, stared at the near catatonic form of their love interest. Kaori and Yui had been having trouble getting to sleep after Issei told them what he had to do last night. It was damn near impossible when they saw it was Sona that was almost carrying him towards the bed when they appeared. The pure-born devil had come carrying a brand new uniform, with Issei dressed in a plain t-shirt and sweatpants. They knew something had happened because he'd left wearing the school uniform. The human girls had never seen him so exhausted before. In a bed meant for one, the three were cuddled together tightly. Each had a leg draped over one of his and a hand on his chest just to feel the rise and fall of his chest with each breath. Last night had been one of the things they were most afraid of Issei facing. The kind of devils that had been responsible for the death of one Shinobu Katase. As tired as they were from the lack of sleep, neither girl could deny the warmth felt when Issei had wrapped an arm around each of them when they crawled into his bed. Even in that deep sleep, he wanted them close. It eased their minds. The amount of sleep the two had been able to get was nowhere near what they liked, but it would have to do. They were preparing for a competition and needed to stay in top form. Since Issei was brand new to kendo and because of his student council devil duties, he wouldn't be participating. He was coming along nicely in skill though, which probably had something to do with his supernatural nature. Kaori watched as Issei would occasionally grunt of shift in his sleep, his face twisting and looking like he was almost upset about something. Yui, what are we to him? The brunette spoke quietly, making sure that their conversation didn't wake him up. They doubted that Sona would mind too much if Issei wasn't there a little earlier like he usually was, not with how he looked last night. It was a question she had wanted to ask for a while now. She had admitted to being in love with him, he would occasionally kiss her on his own, and there was almost always one of them sleeping in his bed now. But there had never been any real clarification on the status of how they referred to each other. What do you mean? Yui rubbed at her eye, trying to wake up enough to be coherent. Am I his girlfriend? Are you? With how busy he's been with school and stuff, plus our kendo schedule, we haven't really had time for a date. Even so, I'd like to think we're dating, right? Kaori felt it was important to have this answered because this morning Momo and Reya were supposed to stop by and the four would have a talk with his mom. Issei had explained what his mom had been talking about with what she said during the incident that his dad started. Even though it had only been an incident, it told the girls more about the woman they'd been living with. They knew she hated lies, but hadn't realized her view of right and wrong was so rigid. It made a little more sense why she liked Yui and Kaori so much. The three of them were alike in the way they valued honesty and doing the right thing. The icy air in the home was still somewhat present, but it was pushed more onto the father than anyone else. The two girls weren't exactly looking forward to meeting the student council president. Both because of the drama she had inadvertently caused and with the way she may act towards Issei. More competition was not something they needed or wanted. Supposedly, the father had been looking into the company he was completing a large order for and one of the companies under the umbrella had led him to the campsite where he saw the girl. According to Mrs. Haidu, the browser history told the same story. But then how did he come to know her name? Why would he spend so much time on a porn site? I know it would be problematic if we called him our boyfriend publicly, but that's what he is to me. I suppose lover would be a better term, but that implies more than I'm willing to give right now. Kaori didn't voice her thoughts on moving towards a more sexual relationship, Yui didn't need any pressure from her. Reya was enough. They didn't talk all the time, but when they did, Kaori got the impression that she was just waiting for the right moment to pounce. After some thought and sleeping in the same bed as him, feeling the appendage that would be involved in said sexual relationship poking at her ass, she was both nervous and excited to take a step in that direction. Not that she had the intention of going all the way right now, but definitely more than they'd done so far. She blamed Issei for the desire even coming about. Because of him, how his hand would drift from her abdomen to grabbing her chest while he slept, she wanted him to touch her. That extra warmth of his skin on hers was soothing, stimulating, arousing and addicting all at once. Yay. Was all Kaori could say as her mind kept wandering. Did being touched affect him as much as it did her? Issei would obviously like any scenario that involved her touching his beep. It had happened once by accident as she tried to get out of bed to use the bathroom and it had stood to attention before she could remove her hand. But what about other places? Good morning you two, I'm glad you're awake before he is. The girls were startled by the voice, their eyes shifting to the door. Once they saw that it was still closed, they looked over to his hand wrapped around Yui. Morning Elsha, what's going on? It still felt weird to be talking to a hand that glowed. I just wanted to prepare you. Issei may be a tad protective for a while. Neither girl needed to hear anything more, they knew that it was because of whatever happened last night. Was it bad? Kaori's voice had a quiver in it, almost afraid of what he may have seen or been forced to do. Worse than it should have been, but it could have turned worse. It was through no fault of their own. The entire group was acting on less information than they should have been given. Elsa said with a sigh. All throughout the night, Elsa could see the dreams Issei had been having. The image of one of the human women in his life being in the position of that elderly woman who lost her life. He felt guilty that he hadn't been able to prevent it. She didn't blame him in the slightest. Issei was lucky to have not come into the supernatural because of such events. But now the fog of ignorance had been lifted and he knew how truly dangerous things could turn and how quickly that could happen. Which brings me back to my first point. The two of you are much more to him than you realize, judging from the bit of conversation of yours that I heard. He's likely to be more physical than he has been in the past. It could be as simple as a touch to the shoulder or holding your hand, maybe a kiss. If he makes you uncomfortable in any way, please don't just push him back. Tell him you're not ready for it. Last night, Ice had to do something that has unsettled him. He will want to show you that values your decision to be in his life. As the girls took in that somewhat worrying statement, both of them would swear on their lives that they saw something strange. The bangs of his hair moved away from his eyes and his lips seemed to have been pressed in slightly by something. They might have been wrong, but it almost looked like someone had kissed him. The dreams had been horrible, seeing the women he loved in one way or another have their throats slit so easily like that woman. There was nothing he could have done without risking her life anyway. His only ranged attacks did not discriminate on human versus devil. Even though he knew that, Issei still felt like shit when he woke up. He hadn't been able to get enough rest thanks to how late things had gone on, and the sleep he did get had his pulse racing in fear of his dreams. He felt like he hadn't eaten in days and after splashing some water on his face and getting ready for another school day, went downstairs for some breakfast. What Issei saw when he made it to the kitchen confused him more than not seeing one of the girls when he woke up. One of them was always there and the other was typically at the doorway. It was something he had gotten used to and now had come to expect. But this was odd. Sitting at the table was his mother, with Yui, Kaori, Momo and Reya sat with her. What in the world is going on here? A hand raised slowly, awkwardly, as they all turned towards him. Stopping all conversation being had. Good morning. They looked at him like he was a puzzle to be deciphered. Reya was the first to turn her eyes elsewhere, glancing at each of the women around the table, before sliding her chair back and standing. Everyone, Issei included, watched as she sauntered over to him, hip swaying. Both hands reached to the sides of his face, bringing Issei down for a kiss. This was a kiss that put her others to shame. She hadn't crashed her lips to his violently, but it wasn't soft either. Reya didn't want to be subtle anymore, not in front of the school, not his mother, or anyone else. She wanted Issei, she'd known that for a while now. Reya had only made her desire and intentions directly known to the three younger women at the table, and it was time to change that. Last night had scared her, thinking that Issei was in danger, unprepared for what they were facing. He could have died, and she would have never told him that she wanted to be with him. Joining Sona as her bishop had been an easy call, as it allowed Reya to overcome what she felt was her greatest weakness. Before becoming a devil, Reya had always wanted to be able to change things. Her life, her circumstances, the way events played out, all of it. She'd always been a decisive person, but lacked the materials, knowledge, and ability. With her growing powers as a devil, she could learn to literally warp the world around them. But there was still so much to do, so much going on, that Reya knew she had to be patient for just a bit longer. The sunlight clasps the earth and the moonbeams kiss the sea. What are all these kissings worth if you will not kiss me? Her voice came like velvet, a smooth and enticing caress to the ears of everyone around. Reya knew that her voice was one of her best attributes. She could keep her voice barely above a whisper and still garner the attention of a crowd. Her soft and gentle expression was something that only added to that charm. The recitation wasn't word for word, but it was close enough that the adult of the group was able to place it. To say Mrs. Haidu was impressed by a high school student in this day and age, knowing anything from a 19th century poet, was an understatement. Issei had nothing to say, and he could feel the heat starting to build, for some reason being embarrassed that his mom had seen one of the girls kiss him. He got the feeling that Reya didn't care who was watching though. The host of Drag stuttered in an attempt of coming up with anything to say, but Reya was quick to stop him, a finger placed over his lips. I thought that if I was walking the line of subtlety, you would get the message eventually, but you're a surprisingly patient person, Ice, and I'm tired of waiting. Issei watched as those eyes of hers shifted towards the others slightly, thinking over her words a little more carefully. When she refocused on him a second later, he saw something that caught him off guard. Desire. It was the only word that came to mind when he looked at her. He was tempted to label that look as something similar to the one he'd seen on his old friends from middle school, but there was no way that a girl like her would thoughts as perverted as them. Right. She leaned closer to him, lowering her voice so that only her fellow devil's ears would be able to catch it. I wonder if you ever think of me, naked, wet, willing, when you're sitting in that computer chair. I hope so, because I want to know if the fantasy is as good as the real thing. She pulled back, seeing the wide-eyed stare he was giving her. Give it some thought. Your mother wanted to talk to the four of us, so we'll meet up with you in class. Issei had never been more willing of a dismissal in his life, and Reya was left feeling a sense of accomplishment. She had actually wondered if he ever thought of her in that way, but it was also to get his mind away from anything less than pleasant. She remembered the first stray hunt she went on all too well. As he grabbed his bag and started towards the door, his mother got up and followed, leaving the girls alone for a few moments. Mrs. Haidu had something she needed to say, something long overdue. Ice. She called, stopping her son after he put on his shoes. When he turned towards her, it was easy to see that he was already getting lost in one thought or another, something he'd been doing more often lately. Issei dropped his bag as his mother took advantage of his attention being elsewhere and hugging him tightly. I'm sorry. Her eyes closed and her grip on him tightened when she felt Issei slowly return the embrace. She still felt it was still a little weird the way he would wake a slow and deep breath when she hugged him. But the way she could feel the tension leaving him always made her feel good. I've been trying to think of a way to apologize for getting angry, not believing you, accusing you of the things I did. Saying sorry has never been something I was good at. All she could do was hope that he forgave her and things could work back to how they'd been before. Their home hadn't felt right with that happy atmosphere gone these last few days. It's okay, Mom. I never wanted to lie to you, but there's just some things that I can't tell you yet. I don't know when it'll be, but I will tell you everything. As Issei pulled back, giving a smile and a wave as he walked out, she couldn't help but feel that he was talking about more than just whatever job he was doing. Trusting him was the only thing she could do for now. He had already shown that he was working toward something, a future he could be proud of. But the door closed, it was time to have a talk that was supposed to have happened already. Coming back into the kitchen, Mrs. Haidu saw that Momo was pouting, giving a glare to Reya. With a raised brow, she turned to Yui and Kaori, hoping they knew what the cause had been. Momo's upset that Reya sent Ice away before she could get a hug or kiss. Yui answered. Only after that did she realize the strange situation they were in. Here they were, with the mother of the guy they wanted. Instead of an argument or fight breaking out because of someone moving in on him, one of the girls was only upset about being left out. I see. Mrs. Haidu filled her mug halfway with coffee before sitting down. She liked the drink, but even a single full cup would have her on edge and jittery all day. I'm sure you're all nervous about this talk, but I don't mean to challenge or sway the decisions you've made. All I want is to have a better understanding. She took a sip, taking those few seconds to organize her choice of words. From what I understand, the four of you are the ones in a relationship of sorts with my son. Momo uncrossed her arms as the conversation began, placing them in her lap. Her and Reya had been concerned over this talk ever since Kaori called that night. But Kaori and the woman herself had said she wasn't exactly against it, merely confused as to why the girls chose this route. They were still young and would surely be able to find another to love in time. Reya and I can't really claim to be in a relationship with him, not yet at least. We're hoping to change that. I thought as much, based on the poem. She said, looking over to Reya. Mrs. Haidu had taken the spoken part of the poem to mean that Reya was wanting to ask Issei if he returned the feelings she had for him. If he would kiss her back. Though personally, she felt that an earlier verse would have been more appropriate. Nothing in the world is single, all things by a law divine. In one spirit, meet and mingle. Why not I with thine? Now that the poem was in her head, she had to admit that the girl's overall choice had been spot on. There may have possibly been some polygamous undertones to it. She would leave dissecting the words of man who died in the 1820s for someone else. You're familiar with Percy Bysshe Shelley? Familiar may have been an understatement. The group of girls in that college poetry class had all fallen in love with the romantic and somewhat adventurous life he had. Hinoka Haidu was not as fanatic as some, but she had daydreamed of similar things happening to her more than once. The interactions with that professor and his aide led to her sitting in the very far back, wearing thicker clothes than normal. I am from my college days. Was the simple and less revealing answer. The way that Reya looked at her made it clear that the teenage girl at least suspected something that may have bordered close to the truth. I asked Yui before, but I'd like to hear your answers as well. Hinoka said, trying to get back on topic. The girls did have to leave soon for school. You're all okay with sharing him? Knowing that there are others? Yes. Both Momo and Reya answered without a moment of hesitation. Aren't you concerned that he'll favor one girl over the rest? Momo looked to Reya, wanting her friend to answer this question. The white-haired bishop was concerned about that for a time. But Reya had pointed something out that made her feel better. I don't think that will ever happen. She spoke calmly, confident in her answer. How can you be so sure? I can't imagine that between the four of you, Issei gives each of you the same attention or affection. Mrs. Haidu had only seen him kiss Yui and Kaori once each, and only from being at the right place at the right time. The girls had to be the ones initiating anything if the kiss with Reya was any indication. Because, while he hides it, Issei is still very much a pervert. We've all seen the way he looks at us when he thinks we're not looking. Looking over the four girls, Mrs. Haidu saw that none disagreed with that statement. If it were just Ice looking at us like that, I doubt any of us would want to be with him. But he listens and cares, he makes you feel special. If the last 2 weeks had taught her anything, it was that her control on Issei's life was limited. She wasn't at the school with him, nor was she there when he was with these girls. Most of the time he was away from home, he was usually with at least one of them. She would just hope that he made decisions that didn't risk the future he wanted. I don't want to be a grandmother before my son is able to provide for his own baby. While she looked at each of the girls when she said that, it was mostly directed towards Reya. The girl was clearly ready to take things to that level. At least she knew that Yui and Kaori weren't. No need to worry, I want to finish college before even considering having children. For now, all I want is to express how I feel about him. There was a distinct lack of an abstinent vow in that statement. Mrs. Haidu made a mental note to be careful of when she opened her son's bedroom door. Sit. Issei had just walked into the student council office and immediately was on the opposite end of his king's hard stare as she pointed to the seat across from her desk, Tsubaki standing in her usual spot beside Sona. The walk to school had his mind going back and forth from the pleasant things Reya had filled it with to the grim results of the stray hunt. All in all, his head was a mess. He couldn't get the image of that woman, how her tired eyes widened when she felt her throat being cut and way the blood oozed and sprayed out as she fell. Killing the stray had been the right call, he knew that. But the fact remained that he had ended another being's life. The only reason he didn't hesitate to finish it off was because of the death he witnessed. Then his mind would go back to its old habits and pictured Reya in the way she described. If his mental state could be described in one word, strange, would do nicely. He obeyed absently, plopping down into the chair, looking off to nowhere with his eyes cast on a downward angle, which Sona took to mean that he knew he was about to be scolded. Adjusting her glasses, Sona started on her pawn. Why didn't you tell me? He didn't answer. I taught you the importance of communication in combat, the trust that is needed between those fighting together. No response. You had an ability that could have helped your teammates defeat the opponent more efficiently. Sona slammed her hands on her desk, standing up quickly, her chair falling behind her. Tsubaki stood, watching Issei closely. At first, she too thought that he was just readying himself to be yelled at. The clap of Sona's hands on the wooden desk made her flinch, but Issei didn't even seem to notice. Well? What do you have to say for yourself? Sona was losing her temper, something that rarely happened. She was tired and had spent over an hour detailing the events to her sister this morning. Her peerage had been put in a bad spot last night, not having all the information about the stray. Reya was skipping school today, still recovering from the fatigue. This made both Tsubaki and Sona nervous as they thought about future events. How were Reya and her group supposed to fight against Riser Phoenix, a prodigy amongst his family of near endlessly regenerating devils, if they were having trouble against a B-class stray? Was Reya not having them train and just hoping to be freed from the power of the Red Dragon Emperor alone? Her anxiety rose when she remembered that Tiamat had agreed to listen to her request. There was no promise to actually accept and train Issei, only that she would listen. Sona hadn't told the Dragon King that it would be Drake's host. She hoped that it would end in her favor. From what Serafal had said, Sona needed to bring up Elsha's name early in the conversation. All of this, added with a lack of rest, made for a very irritable Sona Citri. When Tsubaki saw Sona rear her head back, about to yell even louder, she placed a hand on the king's shoulder. Haichu? That was all that it took to get Sona to stop. Tsubaki didn't interfere with anything Sona did without reason. When Sona looked over, Tsubaki merely gestured to the pawn, sitting there silently. Issei looked like he was lost in his own world, which was unusual for him. Taking a deep breath, Sona calmed herself, reaching for the connection that her evil pieces gave her. She grimaced as feelings of guilt and doubt flooded her. After checking on the well-being of her servants and finding them with only minor wounds, she had ignored everything else. Focusing on the report she had to give. Walking around the desk, Sona put her hands on each of his shoulders, squeezing the tense muscle and tendons there. Ice. She spoke calmly, with a warmer tone than she usually used at the school. Slowly, he looked up at her, brows furrowed. 2 people are dead because of me. She had been so angry over the lack of detail last night that she kept forgetting that a human had died. Not only that, but this was the first time Issei had killed. She could still remember the way that Tomo acted after her first kill. The knight had been brought up from a family that killed demons with holy swords. Because of a curse placed on her, Tomo hadn't been able-bodied enough to ever participate. Tomo had cried for days after that. The stray had taken the form of a young boy, looking innocent of the crimes. When the stray charged, Tomo acted on instinct, slicing its head clean off. "That was not your fault," Sona reassured, kneading her thumbs into his shoulders. "I wasn't fast enough," he mumbled. "We weren't given all the necessary information, Ice. By the end, I could hardly jog a block without stumbling. All of this is still very new to you." Sona was just stating things that she felt might help comfort him. "I need to train harder." She stopped as she had almost gone on with another statement meant to make him feel better. "We all do." And that was the truth. Not just to say, both peerages in Kuo needed to train. B-class strays were not all too common, but they were at the edge of the more frequent 50%. Anything above that might have killed them all last night. Light brown eyes stared into violet and Sona saw the desire for power to protect what he thought of as his. She didn't know what all that entailed, but she knew that the classic trait of a dragon to guard their treasures would come in handy. To a certain extent, the wielders of the heavenly dragon's sacred gears gained in power as easily as breathing. That's just what having a top 10 class being did when it was attached to your soul. "I won't let another one hurt any of you again. Not if I can help it." The way he was staring directly into her eyes made Sona feel like he was about her directly, rather than a group. She swallowed heavily and with a quick glance down, realized that he wasn't wearing the bracelet. Even knowing what was causing this effect did very little to help with its effect. The aura, the stare, the conviction in his voice, it was. "No. It's too soon for this," Sona reminded herself. "Ice, tell me about how you summoned Elsha." She had to distract herself. As a pure-blooded devil, she had a natural disposition towards being selfish, greedy, and as much as she tried to push them back, lust-filled thoughts popped up as well. She could not allow that aura to affect her. Not yet. There was too much to do, so much to focus on. Her mind was her greatest asset, she needed it to be free of those things for now. Once the groundwork of her school was placed, she could afford to be a little more lax. Until then, however, the strict persona she'd built had to be ever present. Issei would just have to get his fill with her bishops for now. If he ever managed to beat her in chess, then things would change. Sona may wear glasses, but she wasn't blind to the looks he gave her. What was odd though, was where he focused. It wasn't her body, like it was most of the time with Reya and Momo. No, when she saw Issei giving her those looks, he was focusing on her eyes, on her face. If he kept looking at her like that, Sona was afraid that she might eventually disregard her own stance on premarital sex. The familiar forest was not a new sight for Sona Citri, but for some reason, she was nervous. Perhaps even scared. Through the efforts of one Seraphol Leviathan, Tiamat had agreed to meet and at the very least hear her request. She had a foot in the door and was just waiting for it to be slammed shut. Tiamat had a history of despising the Red Dragon Emperor and his hosts, having gone as far as to kill a few of them. The air around her felt thick, dense from the humidity. If not for the engravings in the frame of her glasses, she was sure that they would have fogged over by now. Leaving Tsubaki back in Kuo hadn't been her idea, but a suggestion from her sister. The Dragon King was not particularly fond of visitors, preferring to reside in solitude. Sona pulled at the collar of her uniform, both from the strange heat and muggy feeling of this area. She followed the path through the thick expanse of trees that were starting to give way towards a more mountainous area. As the land started to be covered with rock more than grass and the hills got steeper, Sona spotted a large pool of steaming water ahead and to the left of her. That must have been behind the wet and sticky air when the rest of the forest was generally cool. Sona paused, hearing a splash from the distance. Something was in the water. She wasn't surprised by that, but she was prepared to defend herself if needed. Some of the water-dwelling creatures were territorial, and much like a dragon, they did not like being disturbed. The splash came again, this time followed with a series of lighter ones. It sounded like something was swimming. Her trail was leading directly past the spring. Whatever was in there, it didn't sound like it was very big, so Sona walked forward, keeping her eyes peeled and her senses ready. When she got closer, she could see that the water would be a clear and crystalline blue if it weren't for the haze made from whatever was heating it. The splashing came again, and Sona was surprised when she caught sight of it, or rather her. "Millie?" Sona called out, cupping her hands around her mouth, hoping it would carry her voice. The splashing stopped, and the head of a young woman popped up, looking around. Her sandy blonde hair floating in the water around her, Millie turned and turned until she saw the speaker, her maroon-colored eyes widening at who she saw. The girl slithered through the water with ease, ripples whipping behind her. When she made it to shore, Sona really shouldn't have expected anything less. Millie was her familiar. A type of freshwater spirit that was related to mermaids, a melusine. Their upper half resembled a human woman, the bottom half being that of a serpent while in water. When Sona had gone to the forest in search of a familiar, she had still been idolizing her sister. If her sister's title was often represented by a sea serpent, why not search for something of that same nature? Sona hadn't realized how unimaginative she'd been when naming her new familiar until a few years later. Millie slithered out of the water, her two scaled tails holding her upright and moving, not a speck of clothing anywhere on her. Humming to a stop in front of Sona, Millie tilted her head. "Master, why are you here?" Her voice was soft and quiet. "I apologize for disturbing your bath, I know how much you hate that." Before moving to the human world, Millie had stayed in the Citri manor for a time. Until one of the male servants her family employed walked into the bathing area, not knowing she was there. Millie had shrieked so loud that the man was still deaf in one ear, then ran and hid until Sona found her in a closet. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, Millie, everything is fine. I'm on my way to meet with the Chaos Karma Dragon, and since I have you here, could you tell me how much further till I reach her?" Sona hadn't seen Millie in almost 6 months, giving the girl a much-deserved break. There would be a time and place to discuss the changes that had occurred, like her peerage edition, but this wasn't it. "Lady Tiamat. She's about another 5-minute walk that way," Millie pointed, off to the right of the path. "But why are you meeting with her? She doesn't like devils very much." Looking in the direction that her familiar pointed, Sona noted the rock formations just at the edge of her vision. She suspected that to be where the Dragon King lived. "I plan to ask her to train my pawn. The dragon in his sacred gear thinks that she would be the most beneficial for him. Although there is the threat of Tiamat killing him on the spot, I hope she refrains from doing so." Turning back, the heiress saw the way her familiar had paled ever so slightly, her shoulders shivering. "Master, I was bathing once when someone angered her," Millie gulped. "If you value this servant's life, don't bring him to her." The winds ripped through the forest, the ground quaked beneath your feet, any form of life scattered away from her domain when they heard that roar. The strongest Dragon King was not someone you wanted to anger unless you were God class. Luckily for the one who had caused that anger, he was. "I have to try, Millie. There is too much riding on his success for me to back out." Sona appreciated the concern, but there was no turning back. Especially because Ice seemed to have hit some sort of plateau since the stray hunt. For the last 2 weeks, he'd been working himself to the bone in his training, with very little to show for it. He was beyond frustrated with himself, and not even the tender mercies of her bishops or the kendo girls could completely pull him out of it. Sona was proud of him, so very proud, for reaching the level he was at already. His mind and body were working in tandem in ways that surprised even her sometimes. But he needed more. Elsha and Drake had said that he was at a crossroads, an evolution of sorts, and he needed something to push him through it. Sona was still frustrated that they hadn't explained further, saying that the form it took depended on how Issei responded. "I'm gambling almost everything on him, but the reward is worth the risk." Sona had said that enough times that she almost believed it. Almost. As the group watched Issei train with Yura, Kaori turned her eye towards Momo, wondering if she could work up the nerve to talk about the things on her mind. As the two traded blows, Issei was keeping himself from using the boosted gear. She thought of what had happened a few nights ago. Something that she hadn't even told Yui. Issei stepped left, bring his right fist right towards the rook's face. Kaori couldn't help but stayed at his hand. Yura knocked his punch to the side, a left hook coming in with most of her strength behind it. She had learned not to hold too much back with Issei, her legs still throbbed in phantom pain from that day. She had also learned that Issei was quick to pick up new things. He ducked to the right, throwing his body weight into it, wanting to bring his heel over and strike her. But her guard was still up, and Yura caught him by the ankle, throwing the pawn over her shoulder and further away from her. Kaori moved to and beside Momo, who was watching the spar intently. "Hey Momo, got a second?" she asked quietly, hoping that none of the others happened to hear. Issei stood up, dusted himself off, before launching himself back at Yura. "Oh, yay, what's up?" It took a few seconds for Momo to answer, making sure that Issei wasn't getting hurt. The chances were low, but with the way he'd been pushing himself, she didn't want to risk not being ready to heal him. Kaori shifted uneasily, taking a deep breath. Admitting this was embarrassing for her. "I need your opinion on something that happened with Ice." When she heard that, Momo was no longer shifting her gaze over to him every other second, no entirely focused on the human girl. "What was it?" Yura went on the offensive, going for an uppercut, the smile on her face couldn't have been wider. Issei pivoted to the right, her punch just barely missing. Wanting to try something new, he grabbed her wrist tightly, twisting it and moving behind her. He had to let go and scoot back when her heel came back and almost hit him in the nuts. Ever since that stray, he's been grabby, especially when he's asleep. Momo smiled, her eyes losing focus as she remembered the way he responded to her kisses now. He was bolder, holding her as close to his body as he could get without it being smothering. And his hands were more adventurous, sliding up from her legs, over her ass, and up her sides. Momo knew that the cause had been a horrible thing, but she was liking possessive side to him. Yay. It's nice. Kaori snapped her fingers in front of the bishop's face. Focus. She hissed. Momo blinked the daydream away. Okay, so what did he do? Kaori settled and leaned closer to whisper. He usually just grabs onto my chest. But the other night his hand slid down. Her eyes gestured towards the uniform skirt was wearing, Momo's eyes widened ever so slightly for a moment. How far down? Momo's eyes quickly turned over to the other bishop. Reya had a smile on her face as she pretended that she wasn't hearing any of this. Reya was the only devil close enough that would be able to hear, the rest standing closer to the training taking place. You know how far? I was asleep and didn't notice at first. I've gotten used to how his fingers twitch when he's sleeping, but Kaori stopped as she caught her voice rising. Not gonna lie, I'm a little jealous. Momo started, crossing her arms and turning her head. But I'd want him awake. Kaori was almost starting to regret bringing this up at all, but she felt that Momo would be able to help her decide where to go from here. That's what I want your opinion on. Momo rose a white brow. I like it when he touches me, but I don't know where to draw the line. His finger didn't go in, but I kinda wished it had. Now Momo understood why she was the one that Kaori went to. So, you wanna know how far you might feel comfortable going then? Kaori nodded. Yay. I'm not ready to go all the way, especially since we haven't really done anything yet. But I don't know how to start or even what I'm willing to do. Kaori almost screamed when a pair of hands placed themselves on her shoulder. She felt the hair tickling her neck and the breath by her ear. He's waiting for us, Kaori, to decide what we're okay with. If you want his fingers inside of you, wake him up and push it in. Momo was wondering what sort of plan Reya was scheming in that head of hers. The girl gave off the image of a polite, kind, soft-spoken and almost shy young woman. Only the ones a part of their non-human life were aware of the strong-willed and determined to get what she wanted side of her. Reya has a point, as crass as it sounds. This is just as new to Ice as it is to us. He's gotta be handling it himself at least a few times a day, what with him sleeping with one of you every night. I'm sure getting some sort of action is something he'd love. Kaori calmed down, still feeling her pulse pounding. Should we feel bad for basically planning his sexual timeline? She asked, brows furrowing. There was no malicious intent, they didn't want to hold him back or dictate what he could or couldn't do. I think it's better this way, at least until we know our respective boundaries. The group around them gasped, causing the three girls talking to turn. Issei had worn Yura down enough that he was able to get inside her guard with a cupped hand at her neck and a leg position behind her footing, sent her down to the ground. They had been doing this for a while now, and Issei was almost as tired as his friend. When Yura felt herself falling back, she refused to go down so easily. Her hand flashed out quickly, pulling Issei over by the forearm. She managed to get enough force behind it for him to land on his back. Panting and thoroughly exhausted, Yura had him pinned, with a forearm on his neck and a fist raised to strike him in the face. Being on her knees, one between his legs and other to the side, and her arm being where it was, there was only a short distance between them. Oh? What's this? Reya whispered, watching as the two tried to catch their breath. What caught her attention though, was the way Yura didn't seem to want to move. Scraped, a little bloody and surely bruised all over, Issei was smiling up at her, likely congratulating her for the win. Taking a glance to the side, she saw how Momo was watching the same thing. The members of the Citri peerage knew each other well, aside from the king and queen, who liked their privacy. It was easy to tell what was going on inside that head of hers when recalling how the rook would be drooling after one of her fighting shows. Haidu, take an hour break before starting with Tomo. Tsubaki called out, as strict and monotone as ever. But Sona off in the underworld for a meeting, the queen was the one delegating tasks for the time being. With her captive being addressed, Yura finally pulled back, allowing Issei to get up. As Issei stood, his body tensed and his head swiveled left to right frantically, almost like he was looking for some form of danger. But they were alone here, placed in a barrier to keep them isolated from others. After a few more seconds of searching, Issei closed his eyes and grimaced. The tables had turned, and now Sona was the one terrified to the point that she had a hard time breathing. Although that may have been from the power radiating off of the being in front of her. As with almost every woman in her family, Sona was rather short. Even if she had been the tallest of her relatives, her height would still leave her feeling wholly inadequate. Deep blue eyes, crystal clear and as large as her entire head, stared down at Sona with indifference. In front of her was the Chaos Karma Dragon. Tiamat's body was large and if Sona was able to judge correctly, bigger than Tannen. Blue scales just a shade or two lighter than her eyes, laid atop one another, acting like armor. From tip to tail, she must be over 100 feet long. "Speak, devil girl." The voice of the dragon was calm and didn't seem like she'd been trying to raise her volume. Even so, Sona felt the vibrations from that smoky tone to her bones. "Lady Tia." "Drop the lady part. The platitudes of you noble devils are nauseating, especially with the ridiculous politics the lot of you seem so enthralled with." Sona blinked in surprise as Tiamat crossed one massive front leg over the other. She supposed that was the equivalent of the more ladylike posture high-class women used. She had forgotten how Tannen had told her to leave the pleasantries behind. It seemed to be a recurring thing when dealing with dragons. "Very well then. Tiamat, my name is Sona Sitri. I'm grateful to you for being willing to meet with me." Sona hoped that her voice had lost its waver, but she wasn't too confident of that. The dragon rolled her eyes, a small plume of smoke coming from her nostrils as she scoffed. "I've come to ask for your help." Tiamat said nothing, staring down at Sona until she actually heard something worth responding to. "The newest edition of my peerage, I need someone with the appropriate skill set and strength to train him. Due to the events and circumstance of his reincarnation, he is now part dragon. I have been told that another dragon was best suited for this." The scaled part above her eye rose. The little devil girl had piqued her interest. There were only a few known ways for something of that sort to come about and fewer people she knew of that are stupid and or ballsy enough to try it. "And where is this slave of yours?" Tiamat's question had Sona wanting to clench her fists. That may be the equivalent of how many saw the peerage system, but it was not how Sona used it. No one under her command had come to be there without full knowledge and acceptance. "Training with the other members of my peerage, back in the human world." Sona couldn't help the small edge to her voice. She knew her chances were slim and that Tiamat was very likely to refuse. But if Issei couldn't rise above this flatline in his progress, not only would Reya's be stuck with her betrothed, but her own plans would take a drastic hit as well. In short, Sona was starting to see the roadblocks building up and block the path she'd chosen. If her plan was derailed too much further, she would be desperate to find a solution. The fear I understand. I could smash you into the ground, make you nothing more than paste. But what has made you angry, child?" Tiamat dipped her head down from its place several feet above her. When she came down, eye level with Sona, there was no hiding the rage in those violet eyes. "My peerage is akin to family. Each one was reincarnated with their full acceptance and acknowledgement of what it would mean. I provide everything they need and they want for very little. I may be strict, but I am not cruel." Sona was also not very fond of being called a child. She was young, yes, but every little thing she gained was from her own efforts. Until she had proven herself as able-minded and showing her parents that she could maintain the Sitri name to the standard they had, there were very few liberties she was given. Then you are more the exception than the rule. Your race likes to talk big, but when their bluff is called, very few are able to back their claim. Sona had to give her that much. Devils were greedy, prideful, entitled. Her generation has proven to be more so, thinking themselves the center of the universe because of the way the older generations doted on them. The low birth rate and the cost of both the Great War and Civil War had made parents overzealous with their children. The children were given everything they wanted, told they could have anything they wanted, with little to no work involved. Only time will tell if you are how you claim to be. Back to the matter at hand. This member you have, why not take him to Tannen? He has already joined the devils, I imagine he would have no issue taking another student to train. Tiamat raised herself back up and Sona was starting to get used to the pressure pounding down on her, making her thoughts more coherent and less emotionally driven. Tannen had gotten used to reigning in his power in order to deal with the devil masses. Tiamat made no attempt to restrain hers at all, as she hardly dealt with them. He has trained with Tannen before. While it helped my pawn greatly, his progress has become non-existent as of late. No matter how hard he pushes himself. Sona steeled herself, preparing herself for just about anything. If there was going to be a violent response, this was when it would happen. El-Shalivatain believes you to be his best hope and Sona nearly fell to her knees as that pressure from Tiamat expanded several times over. The Chaos Karma Dragon immediately stood, glaring down at the puny devil girl before her, smoke billowing out of her jaw. "Bring the host of Drake to me." The smoke got thicker and Sona could see the small fingers of fire climbing through her massive clenched teeth. "With all due respect, Lady Tiamat." Sona struggled to her feet, doing her best to look and sound resolute. "I will not bring him here just for you to kill him." The smoke got lighter as the flames became more present and the heat was starting to make Sona sweat. Tiamat let a low and menacing growl echo off the trees and down the cave behind. "Then I will search the earth for him myself, burning through cities and towns until I find him. The Norse fire dragon has not once appeared from within that prison. You and your sister, the Leviathan, have wasted my time with your lies. Sona felt the ground quake underneath her feet as the thick blue tail smashed into the rocky soil, leaves falling and wildlife scattering to save themselves from the mighty being's wrath. She felt an almost unbearable urge to run a hand down her face. Issei was a great addition to her peerage, but with him came so many unknowns. His mother, the two human girls, his near death the moment she turned him. It was almost too much. He had done nothing to Tiamat personally, but now she had to weigh the lives of those in her territory to that of her pawn. I can assure you that Elsha has emerged. From her own words, she has been awake longer than Drake himself, who only woke up after the reincarnation. Sona's mind raced, looking for a way that might help dispel the anger being directed at her. He can show you himself. The tail stopped moving, as did the rest of Tiamat's body. Elsha taught him astral projection and can materialize her out of the boosted gear. Sona waited for a response, a change in posture or expression, anything to be able to tell what might happen next. If you fail to bring him to me, or this is some sort of trick, both of you die. The collateral will depend on how long it takes to find him. The words were quiet and menacing, promising a death that would not come quickly or painlessly. Tiamat turned and walked back into the cave that she called home, leaving Sona alone with her thoughts. The moment Sona came into view, Issei was trying to stand up from his spot on the ground and go over to her. When she waved him off to just stay where he was, and Momo pushed him down by the shoulders. She'd been trying to massage out the knots on his shoulders and between his shoulder blades. His muscles were adapting and still trying to manifest the wings that the dragon blood thought was already there. The end result was feeling like he always had an ache he couldn't get rid of. It was tolerable but had been gradually getting worse. The peerage all saw that their king was in no mood for questions. One arm was propped and holding her chin, while the other was across her abdomen. "Ice, let's go." She gave them nothing other than that order for the pawn. Most looked at the heiress, confused by the sudden order when they were told that training was the only thing on the agenda. Issei and Tsubaki, however, looked concerned. Tsubaki, because she knew where Sona had gone. The king hadn't wanted anyone but her to know the specifics just in case things didn't go to plan. For Issei, it was that anxiety, that cold grip on his heart he knew came from her. What kind of meeting would make his unflappable king react that way? Sona called a transport circle a few feet away from them. Before she moved too far away, she turned to Tsubaki. "Do you remember when to call?" Her gaze was serious as it normally was, but this time it felt different. Tsubaki nodded. "If you don't return by nightfall." A small sigh escaped Sona and she turned to Issei. "I'll wait for you in the circle while you say your goodbyes. Be sure to let them know that we should be back before nightfall, but that all depends on your instructor." Light brown eyes widened as Issei thought he knew what she was talking about. Surprisingly, Kaori was the first one to come up to him for a hug and kiss. Unsurprisingly, Reya's was still the most intense. They were gone in a flash of blue as Issei waved to the group, trying to give them a smile that hid how nervous he was getting. When it died down, Issei looked around the forest. So, this is the familiar forest. The trees looked a little strange to him, but he saw the resemblance to the ones near Tanin's territory. The bark was a weird mix of a brown and gray, also being much taller and thicker than anything he'd ever seen in Japan. Sona stepped over a tree root that stuck out from the ground. She was only paying half attention, thinking over her choice. The death of one over the death of many. That was the choice that Tiamat had given her. She would just have to believe that the Dragon King would refrain from killing him or anyone else. "Yes, and with the progress you've made in getting contracts, we'll be returning here soon so you can find your own familiar." That was only sort of accurate, but Sona said it still counted. His number of contracts was middle of the road compared to other peerages. With the amount of time he spent training though, Sona was more than pleased by the number. The thing that was strange is that he had 14 contracts, 9 of which were all technically the same person. Dissociative identity disorder, or so Jade and Barry claim. Barry was the one he saw the most after the others convinced him to summon Issei. A little flamboyant, but he was a nice guy. When Jade was out, it made him uncomfortable. Talking to a girl living in a man's body creeped Issei out at first. Issei could smell something in the air and he turned his nose up to get a better read of it. "Ice dear, get ready to bring me out." Elsha spoke out loud, getting Sona to look over at the green glow on his hand. The scent was stronger when he turned to the right, where the area had more rock than soil. There were plenty of others in the vicinity, but none were as strong as the one he picked up. The breeze carried more of it to him, and Issei was finally able to make sense of what to compare it to. Salted figs and fire. An odd combination to be sure, and not one he'd think would mix well. This was the only time he'd experienced the scent seeming to come from the same source. Bringing his head back down, Issei swore he saw a woman there just a moment ago. His libido often rose when he was stressed, so he wrote it off as his mind playing tricks on him. Issei, I would advise you to do that now. Sona urged her pawn. She was getting the feeling that something was about to happen and neither of them was equipped to handle it. Shaking his head, Issei closed his eyes to focus. He was still a little tired from training with Yura, but he'd be able to bring Elsha out for a bit and be fine. If Sona had come back right as they finished, he might not have had the energy to do it at all. The wind felt like it was being pulled back in the opposite direction as golden particles started to drift together. Maybe this is what he needed. To be tired from the beginning, then trying to push his skills further. Drake had told him that the threat of death was the best thing for growth, but he wasn't exactly comfortable with that right now. Look out. You don't. Elsha and Sona cried out at the same time, just as his picture of the Norse fire dragon completed. The world felt like it was turning all of a sudden, the back of his knees throbbing for a reason he couldn't place. Any air in his lungs was forced out when a solid impact came to his stomach and his eyes flung open. His head smacked the ground after his back and Issei was left gasping. He couldn't breathe, couldn't see more than a vague sense of color, and his hearing was just a loud ringing with inaudible mumbles behind it. You have to get up, partner. Brake's voice rang inside his mind, but Issei was still too dazed to understand. The colors blended, blue into gold directly in front of him, with a variety of brown, green, black, white and purple mixing in between. When he tried to take a deep gasping breath, his ribs felt like they were being held down by a plate of heated steel, and that heat was slowly spreading outward. It hurt like only one thing had before. The fire that had scorched his lungs when he was turned into a devil, it felt a lot like that. Issei had to get up, he had to see what was happening. They came here peacefully, looking for training, not to get the shit kicked out of them almost right when they appeared. I have to get up. I have to protect her. Sona was here, and he had sworn that he'd keep her safe. The first of many intakes of air was finally achieved as the colors finally started to separate from his vision, forming the shapes of three bodies. On his fourth breath, Issei slowly pushed himself to sit up. That burning sensation on his chest had only lessened a small amount, but it had dwindled enough that he could do something other than focus on the pain. One of the bodies, one that was a clearing mix of white, black and magenta, leaned down from beside him. How bad is it? A hand, soft and small, touching the skin on his chest. He'd know that voice anywhere, but it had spoken with more emotion than usual. It was Sona, she was the one there with him. Issei took another pained breath before answering. Nothing like having your chest caved in to feel alive. I'll be okay. Blinking his eyes hard, Issei tried to focus them back to normal. He could finally see the strands of black hair, the rims of her glasses, and those eyes of hers that sucked him in every time. Her eyes were shifting from him to just in front, where the other bodies were. He's not like the others, Tia, I promise you. Issei could hear that Elsha was close and had to be the one right in front of him. Pushing himself to stand, Issei raised his head to see who in the hell had just almost knocked him out so quickly. I could smell his desire for power from my home. As glad as I am that you are here, those like him should not be allowed to draw breath. Elsha was the one closest to him besides Sona. Standing there almost protectively, her white dress and golden hair almost seemed to glow, but that was probably his eyes still recovering. The other was another woman. Long pale blue hair extending down her back, eyes as blue as the ocean. Those eyes were set in a firm scowl. Maybe an inch or so taller than him, Issei took a better look at his attacker. Beautiful and clearly dangerous, Issei could instinctively tell that not only was this woman a dragon, but one far superior to him. His desire for power comes from a place of love, not because of some supposed destined fight. Elsha glanced back at him and smiled, happy to see that he was at least back on his feet. Issei hadn't seen it, still sizing the woman up. I lost my way because they thought me perfect. Ice is already better because he knows he is flawed, and his loved ones would never let him give in to the feelings of the past. Long legs adorned by a navy blue knee-length skirt, her button-down shirt was the same shade and looked to be having a hard time staying together as her chest pressed against it. Why do you trust him so much? The new woman, who Issei had guessed to be Tiamat, crossed her arms as she continued to only give Elsha the time of day. He was thankful for being given the time to recover from whatever way she'd attacked him. I've watched over him since he was just a small child from inside the boosted gear. He has never acted with malicious intent. Issei is just a young man placed in a situation outside of his control. Both Sona and Issei felt like ants when Tiamat finally turned her gaze to them. Blue reptilian eyes looked the Red Dragon Emperor over, weighing the options available to her. Should I agree, you know what I demand in return. Seeing the opportunity, Sona placed herself in the conversation. She hadn't spent all that time back home learning. If compensation is a concern, you have my word that your price will be met. Tiamat smirked, finding something in that statement to be funny. It is not your word that matters. Her eyes settled on Issei. Well, hatchling. Do you want the same training I put the Norse fire dragon through? When all three women turned to him, Issei rubbed at the back of his head, a habit he'd been trying to break himself of. I don't really have any money to pay you, he admitted like it was some great embarrassment. When Sona opened her mouth to offer it, Tiamat shut her up with a sharp glare and a flare of power. Currency is not what I want. Drake borrowed something of mine before he was stupid enough to get himself sealed. I want you to find it. Issei blinked, wondering why it seemed to be such a big deal to her that he finds whatever it was Drake lost. That's the reason you hate me? Because I lost your treasure when I died. Yet again you seem to have forgotten. Did we not go over this with 3 of your past hosts? Her voice was laced with venom and power, vibrating the air like a shockwave. But I am not talking to you, Drake. My goodwill and trust for you was ripped apart with your body, so stay out of this. Elsha walked to stand by his side, opposite of Sona, even though she could have just appeared there. Will you accept, hatchling? My offer will not be available much longer. Placing a hand on his shoulder, Issei saw Elsha smile and nod. Looking over to his king, Issei just saw her thinking deeply. If she disagreed with what Tiamat wanted, she would have voiced it by now. I accept. He said, bowing down to her. I look forward to learning from you. When he heard the dragon chuckle, Issei raised his head. His eyes lifted back to her and immediately had to close from the wind kicking up dirt and rock. Tiamat exerted her power on the world around them, creating a funnel of wind that knocked Sona back several feet, dispersed Elsha into golden particles, and had Issei sliding back. Foolish boy. You want to be tutored by the strongest dragon king. As the wind continued to slap against his skin, Issei felt like something inside of him wanted to break free and take control. Whatever Tiamat was doing was making him angry and excited at the same time. He felt like she was belittling him, deeming him insignificant, unworthy of even existing in the same plane as her. The rational part of his mind knew that he was nowhere near her strength. But that instinctual desire to prove her wrong still wanted to come out. Show me that you're worth my time. Make me see that you are different than those that came before you. Prepare yourself, young Drake. The wind died and Issei was able to see again, only for his gaze to take in something he didn't know was possible. Blue wisps of something most definitely intangible surrounded Tiamat. A visual representation of her power radiating from her body. She wants to see if you'll drown in the power. Issei didn't need to see her to know that Elsha was not exactly happy with what was going on. He had spent most night training with her, trying to get used to the way his body felt with its changes, and was able to pick up on her tones and moods. Not really sure what that means. Tiamat raised a hand, gather a plethora of that blue energy into her palm. She's challenging you, partner, knowing that you will fail. Drake added, his tone bitter from being talked to like a forgetful child. And I still don't know what you're talking about. Issei wanted to scream at the two of them, wishing they'd just use words that made some beeping sense. You need to stay calm, Ice. That is exactly what she expects to see, for you to lose your composure. With her other hand, Tiamat sent a small blast of her power. As it rushed by him, Issei almost wanted to call it fire, but it didn't give off any heat. Dragons are like many creatures that humans are familiar with. The only thing that's relevant right now is the feeling she's causing inside you. Do you remember what caused the death of almost every other boosted gear wielder, myself included? Of course he remembered. The Juggernaut Drive, a power that came from the release of Drake's seal in the boosted gear, driven by the hatred and resentment of all the other wielders. While its strength was supposed to be immense, it also drained your life force and took your sanity as collateral. I remember. He'd been extremely surprised to learn that the calm, kind and compassionate woman that was the Norse fire dragon had been killed because of that curse. The hosts of the heavenly dragons are especially susceptible to giving in to the curse when they are backed into a corner with no other way out. You are the wielder of the dragon of domination, and Tiamat is challenging your dominance. Dodging another blast of that strange blue manifestation, Issei was sure that this wasn't even 1% of what she was going to put him through. And he was feeling like Elsha was dancing around whatever she was really meaning to say. For all of your progress these last few months, sometimes you're as dense as a toddler. A dragon issues a challenge for only 2 reasons. To have the other submit and obey whatever whim, or to secure a mate. The only difference between the two is the intention. Issei didn't have the time to react to what he'd been told as the challenge finally started to get underway. Tiamat launched a much larger attack towards him, following behind it to catch Issei off guard. She was only going to hold back enough for him to survive with a moderate injury. If he teetered on death's door from what portion of her power she used, then this meeting had been pointless. Sona had risen from the ground and finally came into view, just as Tiamat was launching her pawn through several trees. Sona scrubbed at her glasses with a frown on her face. She'd been getting daily reminders of why dragons were so feared throughout history. Even with the magical application to her glasses, she still managed to find bits of dirt embedded into them over the last 2 weeks. Mother and father, I understand. Why other devils seem to have taken an interest in my peerage still eludes me. She was sitting at her desk with over an hour before any of her peerage would start to arrive. Across from Sona, sitting in the chair with a serious expression was her sister Serafal. Contract numbers are public record. Every family knows that you are one to watch in regard to the young devils. There was even a gossip piece in one of the newspapers. The meeting had started the usual way. Which meant that Serafal had clung onto Sona with everything she had. Sona only got away because of mystical means that the world would never know. The main topic had gotten the eccentric devil king to turn serious thankfully. A large piece of black and white print appeared in the magical girl's hands and she looked down to the desired section. Sona Citri spotted with former Dragon King Tannen. That was the title of the headline for this particular piece. They mentioned a young man being with you, speculating that it was a new peerage member. They don't know his name, sacred gear or anything significant about him. The underworld only knows that you have a new pawn and have brought him to a major player for some reason. Frustrated that she couldn't get that last speck of dirt from her frame, Sona gave up and just put the glasses on. She'd give a more thorough attempt later. That crunching and grinding sound when her frame shifted was incredibly distracting. Then I still have time to prepare. With a sigh, Serafal made the newspaper vanish. That's why I'm here actually. Sona never liked it when her sister spoke in that tone. Last time had been when she heard of how her parents had made arrangements to marry her off. Now Sona had to wonder what sort of trial she was about to be put through. Ajuka agreed to see the Red Dragon Emperor and check his evil pieces. But that's not all. The Bale family has also taken notice of your movements. They know that you wouldn't use your pieces on someone that had no prospects. The fact that you took him to Tannen so quickly after reincarnating him has them curious. Her hands were steepled on her desk as she tried to look at every angle. The great king of Bale was the de facto leader of the devils. That family held more political influence than any of the devil kings individually. If any of her plans were discovered too soon, she could be shut down before she even really got started. What do they know? Sona asked, her violet eyes and voice coming across with the same temperature as her sister's famed ice magic. We're not sure. Zekrom and Lord Bale have many loyal to them, but what information they have and where it came from can't be determined yet. The only thing we can be sure of is that your property scouting and mysterious new servant were noticed. Lord Bale. A man that was as prideful as they came. Even taking another wife just because Miss La Bale had given birth to a son without the power of destruction. He called both of them a disgrace, sending the pair out to the edges of their land. Having a harem wasn't uncommon for a devil, but the Bale family held themselves to a different standard. A man from that family was expected to marry the best woman the underworld had to offer, and there would be no other. But Miss La had been pushed into the dark corner of the underworld, forgotten and left to rot. The poor woman hadn't even opened her eyes in almost a decade. Lord Bale's father had been the first to take more than one wife, a decision that had apparently been looked down upon by his family for a long time. Sona, you're running out of time. Riser is pushing to move things up sooner than you planned. If Issei isn't ready when the time comes, all of this will be for nothing. Her hands fell from in front of her face and onto the desk. But the agreement says that Reya has until she graduates from a university. Her hands clenched the table, nearly digging scratch marks into the hard wood. This shouldn't be happening. The plan was for Reya to take the fight to him, requesting an unofficial raiding game to free herself. Without Reya's help, she was going to have an even harder time. Serafal reached over and placed a hand on her sister's. I know, but he's gotten wind that Reya thinks she found a way out of the engagement. He can only push so hard without upsetting either family, so there's still a chance that the timeline isn't too affected. When Sona unclenched her hand, her sister went back to her seat. The four of us are behind you on this, but we have limits to what we can do. Issei needs to be extraordinary by the time Riser comes around. You, Tiamat, Reya or whoever is training him, need to cover all bases. Power, strategy and political. She should have listened to that little voice in the back of her head, saying that it wasn't enough. I can't push him any harder. He comes home every day with at least one broken bone and bruised ribs, worse if he wasn't performing at 100% the entire time. Momo and Reya already have their work cut out for them with the healing. Not that they minded in the least. Sleeping naked with a man they loved was no hard task to perform. Although it had made Reya a little irritable. I needed both of them to be there last night just to make sure he didn't stop breathing in his sleep. Dislocated knee, broken left wrist, punctured lung, probable concussion and a shattered thumb. Issei would be fine by the time he woke up, but he was in a lot of pain until he fell asleep. The human girls weren't going to like it, but there was little choice. Issei was going to have to train with Tiamat full-time during the summer break and then continue his daily beatings after school. The only plus side would be the little time he'd have to spend around Ayla. Momo stood at the doorway and took in the scene just in front of her. She had only gotten up to go and shower before helping his mother with breakfast. It had appeared as though Reya was still out cold when she got up. Clearly, she was wrong and those few minutes were all that her friend was waiting for. Healing Issei had been a blessing in disguise. She didn't like seeing him so exhausted, pained and broken, but having that direct contact with him was bliss. If she hadn't just showered and gotten into the school uniform, Momo might have just joined into what her friend had started. The click of a cell phone camera went off and only Momo appeared to have heard it since Issei was too busy panting and trying to catch up. Kneeling on the floor at the edge of the bed was Reya, tapping on the screen before putting it back into Issei's bag just within reach. She's got it all over her face. Momo mentally screamed. The brown braids were undone and her body was still as unclothed as it had been when they went to bed. What stood out right now was the whitish fluid that ran from her scalp and down to her chest. The bishop's face had been particularly covered. Reya turned towards the door with a smile of smug satisfaction. What better way to say I love you than a good morning beep. Issei raised his head and a finger to say something. Right as he did, Reya turned back to him and made a show of slowly licking the fluid running down her cheek. Humming as though she liked the taste. He fell back to the bed and Momo watched as he seemed reinvigorated by what she'd done. Are you feeling better, Ice? He could only nod to Reya's question. Do you believe that I love you now? Those brown eyes twinkled in delight, loving the way that she left him breathless from her mouth and breasts. Yes. His lungs took in large gulps of air. Good. Reya dipped her head, sucking off the remnants that had escaped her before. Issei twitched and moaned on the bed until she pulled her lips off of the tip. Momo watched as Reya stood and walked into the hallway, not caring that his mother just might see the girl covered in cum courtesy of her son. Covering himself with the blanket that had been tossed to the edge of the bed, Issei sat up. Normally he wouldn't even think of doing this, but Reya had been pretty clear before she did what she did. Momo. Even just getting her attention had his heart starting to pick up its pace again, although for a very different reason. Issei felt a little more confident when he saw the way her eyes trailed over the uncovered parts of him, like she was admiring a work of art that was just out of reach. He scratched at the back of his head, a nervous smile coming over him. This probably isn't the best time to say this, but I might just get too nervous to do it later. Momo felt her heart was dropping into her stomach as he readied himself. What was he going to say? She hoped it wouldn't be the let's just be friends thing. No, it couldn't be that, not with the way he pulled her in when they kissed. Was he going to? Reya said that I was pretty easy to see through, but I don't want you to be left guessing. Just spit it out already. The pounding of her pulse was the only thing she could hear aside from his voice, and the anticipation was killing her. He might not have gotten the message until the girls made it abundantly clear, but Reya was right when she told him that they knew how he felt. All he needed to do was say the words. I love you, Momo. She couldn't keep herself from pouncing on Issei, kissing him until she felt dizzy from the lack of air. Reya may have gone a little over the top in getting things to move forward, and Momo would get her back somehow, but for the moment nothing else mattered. With summer vacation almost here, Momo was looking forward to getting some quality time with him. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends.